What in a world where division often masquerades as righteousness, and where the lines between the saved and the damned are drawn with jagged certainty, it is easy to meet fire with fire. When someone brands you an enemy of God, a corrupter of youth, or an agent of darkness, the human instinct is to fight back, to scream, to argue, or to walk away in disgust. But what happens when you choose a different path? What happens when you walk straight into the heart of the hatred? Not with a weapon, but with a song? What happens when you face a crowd that has already condemned you and offer them not judgment but grace? In the summer of 1978, in a small town deep in the American South, Bob Marley did exactly that. He stood in the center of a storm of prejudice and silenced it with a single, radical act of love. This is not just a story about a musician. It is a story about the power of the human spirit to transcend boundaries and the unexpected ways that faith can unite even the most divided hearts. This is the moment Bob Marley walked into the lion's den and walked out having tamed the beast. Welcome to Marley Files, the Untold Stories. The date was August 27, 1978. The place was Millerville, Georgia, a town so small you could drive through it in the blink of an eye, yet so deeply rooted in its traditions that change felt like a foreign concept. Millerville was a place where everyone knew everyone, where the church was the center of the universe, and where the lines between insider and outsider were drawn in stone. It was a Sunday morning, and the air was thick with the suffocating humidity of a Georgia summer. Bob Marley and his band were passing through, their tour bus a colorful anomaly on the quiet country roads, when the engine sputtered and died just outside the town limits. While the crew and mechanics cursed the heat and set to work on the breakdown, Bob decided to stretch his legs. He stepped off the bus and began to walk toward the center of town. He was a striking figure, his dreadlocks cascading down his back, his clothes relaxed and vibrant, his very presence radiating an energy that was alien to this sleepy, conservative community. As he walked down Main Street, the town seemed almost deserted. Save for the cars parked neatly in front of the Millerville First Baptist Church, the sound of singing drifted from the open windows, a chorus of voices rising in praise. It was a sound Bob knew well. Despite the theological differences between his Rastafarian faith and the Baptist tradition, the roots of the music were the same. The longing for redemption, the praise of the Creator, the collective cry of the human spirit reaching out to the divine. It was a language Bob spoke fluently. Drawn by the music, he approached the church. He stood outside for a moment, listening to the congregation sing "How Great Thou Art." The hymn washed over him, stirring memories of his own childhood in Jamaica, of the spiritual gatherings in the hills where music was the bridge between earth and sky. Without a second thought for how he might be perceived, Bob walked up the steps and slipped quietly into the back of the sanctuary. The church was full, packed with families dressed in their Sunday best, men in suits and ties, women in hats and floral dresses. It was a sea of white faces, a congregation that prided itself on tradition and order, and there, standing at the back, was Bob Marley. He didn't try to draw attention to himself. He simply stood with his head bowed, closing his eyes and letting the music wash over him. He was there to worship, to share in the moment of praise, but his presence did not go unnoticed. As the hymn ended and the congregation took their seats, a murmur rippled through the pews. Heads turned, whispers were exchanged, eyes widened in shock and suspicion. And at the front of the church, standing behind the pulpit, was Pastor William Johnson. Pastor Johnson was a man of his time and place. 52 years old, with silver hair and a stern, unyielding countenance, he had led this flock for over 2 decades. He was a man who believed in absolutes. There was right and there was wrong. There was God and there was the devil. And in his eyes, the man standing at the back of his church with his wild hair, his dark skin, and his foreign appearance could only be one thing. The pastor's face hardened. He gripped the sides of the pulpit, his knuckles turning white. The silence in the room was deafening. "Brothers and sisters," Pastor Johnson began, his voice booming with authority, "we have a visitor with us today." He didn't say it with warmth. He said it with accusation. A visitor who represents everything that is wrong with our modern world. The congregation shifted uncomfortably. Sensing the storm that was about to break, Bob remained standing, his expression calm. though he must have felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes boring into him. He had faced prejudice before. It was nothing new, but to face it here in a house of God was a different kind of sting. This man, the pastor continued, pointing a shaking finger directly at Bob, with his ungodly hair and his heathen appearance, represents the devil's influence in our society. He is a practitioner of a false religion. He worships a false god. The words hung in the air like smoke. Rastafarianism, the pastor spat the word out as if it tasted foul, is a cult that rejects Jesus Christ. These people worship a dead African king. They use drugs in their rituals. They spread their poison through music that corrupts the minds of our children. The tension in the room was palpable. Some members of the congregation nodded in agreement, their faces set in grim approval of their pastor's defense of the faith. Others looked down at their hands, embarrassed by the ferocity of the attack. But no one spoke up. No one defended the stranger. Pastor Johnson wasn't finished. "Sir," he addressed Bob directly now, his voice trembling with what he believed to be righteous indignation. "I must ask you to leave this holy place. Your presence here is an insult to Jesus Christ and to every faithful Christian in this community. Go, take your darkness elsewhere." The sanctuary fell into a stunned silence. This was the moment where most men would have turned and walked out, perhaps shaking the dust from their feet, perhaps shouting an obscenity, perhaps vowing never to return. It would have been justified. It would have been understandable. Bob Marley stood there, isolated, judged, and condemned. He looked at the pastor, then at the congregation. He saw the fear in their eyes. He saw the ignorance. But he also saw something else. He saw people who were lost, people who were clinging to their dogma because it was the only safety they knew. And in that moment, Bob made a choice. He didn't choose anger. He didn't choose retreat. He chose engagement. Slowly, deliberately, Bob began to walk down the center aisle. He didn't stride with arrogance, but with a quiet, unshakable dignity. The sound of his footsteps on the carpeted floor was the only noise in the room. Pastor Johnson tensed, bracing himself for a confrontation. Was this man going to attack him? Was he going to cause a scene? The ushers half rose from their seats, ready to intervene. But Bob stopped at the foot of the pulpit. He looked up at the pastor, his gaze clear and steady. There was no hate in his eyes, only a profound, unsettling sadness mixed with compassion. "Pastor Johnson," Bob said, his voice soft but carrying to the back of the room, "I thank you for allowing me to worship in your beautiful church, even if only for a moment." The politeness of the words caught everyone off guard. It was like pouring cool water on a raging fire. The pastor blinked, confused. "Before I go," Bob continued, "may I share something with your congregation?" Pastor Johnson was stunned. He had expected a fight, not a request to speak. Caught between his own aggression and Bob's unexpected grace, he found himself nodding. "I suppose," he stammered, "you can say what you need to say. Then you leave." Bob turned to face the congregation. He looked out at the faces, the elderly women clutching their Bibles, the fathers with their arms crossed, the children peering over the pews. "My name is Bob Marley," he said. "I am a Rastafarian, as the pastor said. But what he may not know is that Rastafarianism is, at its heart, faith rooted in the Bible. We believe in Jesus Christ. We believe he is the Lord and Savior. We read the same scriptures you read. We pray to the same God you pray to." A ripple of whispers went through the room. This contradicted everything they had been told, everything they thought they knew. Bob didn't stop. "Pastor Johnson said we worship a false god, but we worship Jah. Jah is simply another name for Jehovah, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of this church." The pastor's face reddened. He felt his authority slipping away. "You are twisting the truth," he shouted, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "You reject the Bible." Bob smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that seemed to encompass the entire room. "Actually, Pastor, we embrace it. May I share a verse?" Before the pastor could object, Bob began to quote, "Judge not, that ye be not judged. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again." The words of Matthew 7:1 struck the room like a thunderclap. Bob didn't stop there. "And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? He spoke the verses not with the cadence of a preacher scolding his flock, but with the reverence of a believer sharing a truth he lived by. "You see," Bob said, looking back at the pastor, "the same Jesus you serve taught us to look past the outward appearance. He taught us to love one another. When I walked in here, I didn't come as an enemy. I came as a brother. I came to sing praises to the same Father." The room was silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of reflection. The walls of prejudice were beginning to crack. "You mentioned our music," Bob continued. "You said it corrupts, but our music is like your hymns. It is meant to lift up the spirit. It is meant to bring people together, not drive them apart. We sing about redemption. We sing about grace." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. Grace, it was the one thing missing from the pastor's sermon, and the one thing filling the room now. "There is a hymn," Bob said, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "I learned it as a child in Jamaica. Before I knew anything about Rastafari, I knew this song. It speaks to all of us. It speaks to the sinner and the saint." And then, without asking for permission, Bob began to sing. He didn't need a band. He didn't need a microphone. His voice, raw and soulful, filled the sanctuary. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." It wasn't the traditional, stately version they were used to. Bob infused it with the rhythm of his soul, a slight lilt that hinted at the islands, a depth of emotion that came from a life of struggle and triumph. "I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." As he sang, something miraculous happened. It started in the back row, a hum, a murmur. Then a voice joined in, then another. By the time he reached the second verse, "'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear," the congregation was singing with him. The barriers fell. The suspicion evaporated. In that moment, they weren't white Baptists and he wasn't a black Rastafarian. They were just people, united by a song that transcended their differences. Even the most hardened faces softened. Tears began to flow. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated spiritual connection. When the song ended, the silence that followed was profound. It was a holy silence. Bob turned back to Pastor Johnson. The pastor was standing there, his head bowed, tears streaming down his face. The anger was gone, replaced by a look of utter defeat and humility. "Pastor Johnson," Bob said gently, stepping closer, "I hold no anger in my heart for you. I know you were trying to protect your flock. But maybe today, we can learn that we don't need to protect ourselves from each other. Maybe we can learn that love is stronger than fear." Pastor Johnson looked up. He tried to speak, but his voice failed him. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Mr. Marley," he whispered, the microphone picking up the tremor in his voice, "I owe you an apology. A profound apology." He turned to his congregation, his hands gripping the pulpit for support. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "I have sinned today. I judged a man by his appearance. I spoke out of ignorance. I preached hate when I should have preached welcome." He looked back at Bob. "This man has shown more of the Spirit of Christ in 15 minutes than I have in a lifetime of sermons." Bob extended his hand. It was a gesture of peace, of forgiveness, of brotherhood. Pastor Johnson hesitated for only a second before taking it. And then he did something that shocked everyone. He pulled Bob into an embrace. The image of the white, conservative, Southern Baptist preacher hugging the dreadlocked reggae icon was seared into the minds of everyone present. It was an image of reconciliation that seemed impossible just an hour before. "Mr. Marley," the pastor said, wiping his eyes, "please stay. Stay and worship with us. Share another song," Bob smiled. "I would be honored," he said. For the next hour, the order of service was forgotten. Bob sang. He sang songs of freedom, songs of unity, songs that blended the rhythms of Jamaica with the themes of the gospel. The congregation clapped, some even swayed. It was a revival in the truest sense of the word. Not a revival of dogma, but a revival of the heart. After the service, the scene outside the church was unlike anything Millerville had ever seen. People lined up to shake Bob's hand, to thank him, to ask questions. The walls of the cultural divide had been breached. Pastor Johnson invited Bob to his home for lunch. Over a meal of fried chicken and sweet tea, the two men sat and talked for hours. They talked about scripture, about music, about the burdens of leadership. and the struggle to do what is right in a world that often demands conformity. "You changed me today, Bob," the pastor admitted. "I realized I've been preaching a small God, a God who looks like me and thinks like me. You showed me a God who is bigger than my prejudices." Bob nodded. "We all have beams in our eyes, Pastor. The work is to keep trying to see clearly." The story of that Sunday morning didn't stay in Millerville. It rippled out. Headlines appeared in local papers. "Reggae star preaches love in Georgia church." But the real impact was quieter, more personal. Pastor Johnson was never the same. His sermons changed. The fire and brimstone were replaced by messages of inclusivity and grace. He began to reach out to the black churches in the area, building bridges that had been burned for generations. 6 months later, he invited Bob back for a concert held right there in the church sanctuary. People came from miles around, black and white sitting side by side, witnessing the power of music to heal what politics and tradition had broken. When Bob Marley passed away in 1981, a memorial service was held at Millerville First Baptist Church. Pastor Johnson stood in the pulpit, looking out at a congregation that was far more diverse than the one Bob had walked into 3 years earlier. "Bob Marley taught me what it means to be a Christian," he told them. "He taught me that faith isn't a fortress to keep people out. It's a table where everyone has a seat. He taught me that when we meet a stranger, we are meeting a brother we haven't learned to love yet." This story is a testament to the man Bob Marley was. He wasn't just a musician. He was a revolutionary of the soul. He carried a weapon far more powerful than anger, far more effective than violence. He carried the weapon of radical love. In a moment where he could have been a victim, he chose to be a teacher. In a place where he was seen as a devil, he revealed the divine. It is a lesson for all of us. When the world accuses us, when hatred stands in our way, we have a choice. We can mirror the darkness, or we can be the light that dispels it. Bob Marley chose the light, and in doing so, he left a legacy that echoes far beyond the notes of his songs. A high legacy of a love that knows no boundaries, a faith that knows no fear, and a grace that can save a wretch like you and a wretch like me.